What would you think if you received a letter that began with Dear Saint? Would it be weird to get something like that? Would you think it must be part of some generic bulk mailing campaign and it could never be for you personally? Well, brace yourself for this week's study of a letter that is to us as much as it is to anyone, from Paul and Timothy to all the saints. Well, why would we read a letter addressed to saints? It can't possibly be for us, can it? The Roman Catholic Church has canonized about 10,000 saints since it began doing it about 1,000 years ago, and none of us are on that list, nor should we be, right? I mean, it's one thing for Paul to call us servants, but saints couldn't apply to any of us, could it? Well, that's what we're going to try to unpack this week. And we're going to start with the first written appearance of the word that went on to be translated saints. We need to go way back to about 1400 BC. Moses was 80. 40 years had passed since he killed an Egyptian for abusing one of his fellow Israelites. And Moses then fled into the wilderness. And Exodus chapter 3 tells us Moses was on the far side of the wilderness. It doesn't get much more desolate than the far side of the wilderness. The place was on the fringe of Mount Sinai, also known as Mount Horeb. It was there that one of the most well-known Bible stories was lived out, Moses and the burning bush. And it says, the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. And Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight. And when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. That is the first time the word holy or anything like it appears in the Bible. Notice it was used as an adjective describing the ground, holy ground. Carry that to where we are in Philippians, Paul and Timothy to all the saints. And that can be a little confusing because the word Paul used was not a noun or a name. It was also an adjective. It was the Greek word for holy. And the English translation could be more literally holy ones, just like in Exodus 3 with holy ground. Notice God didn't say the awesome, burning, but not burning up bush was holy. I think that would make a lot more sense for a lot of people. A burning but not burning up bush seems more holy than ground in a desert. If you look up holy in a thesaurus, you'll see words like pious and righteous and devout and virtuous and pure. So, yeah, like a flaming bush with God speaking from inside it would seem holy. But that's not what the word meant in the context of Exodus 3, and it was not what the word meant in Philippians. Notice what God did say was holy. The ground. Holy ground. The word that was there in this setting meant soil or dirt. Holy dirt. The first time the word holy appears in the Bible is used to describe dirt. How in the world could dirt be holy? Well, how could any of us be holy? To think of ourselves and dirt as holy feels almost contradictory, an oxymoron. But the word, as it appeared in Exodus 3, and in the way Paul used it in Philippians 9, did not mean pious, righteous, devout, or virtuous. It meant set apart, or more fully, set apart for special use, unlike any others of its kind. Moses was at the foot of Mount Sinai, which was on the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula, almost all of it this wild wasteland. Think like the other side of the mountain, heading into the Mojave Desert from here. Even though it would have looked like pretty much everything else all across that huge area, God said the place where Moses was had been set apart for something special, which made it unlike any other place. It was holy. We'll continue to unpack this, but let me put one core thought out there. Paul and Timothy, to all the holy ones who follow Jesus, to all who are unlike others because they have been set apart by God for special parts in his plan. Set apart for special parts in God's design. Well, back to Moses. I cannot imagine what God speaking out of a burning but not burning up dry desert bush was like. But I can picture Moses like looking around at the desert wilderness and thinking, holy ground? This is going to be for something special? Well, by the way, this should be exciting for those of us who have ever looked in a mirror and thought, um, can God do anything with this? As with many things in the Bible, there is a wide variety of opinions and attempts at answers to the question of why God had Moses take his sandals off in that holy place. Dr. Tim Mackey is one of the more prominent teachers of the ancient Hebrew language and culture these days, and after digging into many of the experts he knows of, he concluded there's something about the bottom of his sandals that is inappropriate to bring into the sacred space. Moses had been a shepherd in the wilderness for years. So think about all the things he would have walked through every day, all day, especially the kinds of things animals leave behind, including animal carcasses. It's as though Moses was getting his first lesson in the kinds of things that keep us from God and God's design for taking care of that. The whole scene was like a microcosm of what was ahead for Moses and the Israelites, including when God told him, now go. Part of being set apart for special parts in God's design includes movement. It involves going, even as we would say, going online. In Moses' case, being set apart for a special part of God's design came with specific instructions that involved him being the point person in God's plan to rescue the Israelites from hundreds of years of slavery in Egypt under Pharaoh. And that fills the next several pages of Exodus, including this woefully understated line. When Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through Philistine territory, even though that was the shortest route to the promised land. That crazed, extended route took them back to the southern tip of the peninsula, and specifically to Mount Sinai, the site of Moses' encounter with God in the burning but not burning up bush. By the way, I realize the way I've been approaching this study in Philippians may seem like the journey the Israelites took, not exactly the shortest route. Well, Nothing in the Bible is to be taken in isolation. Every part and every story is on a carefully designed thread that runs all the way through the Bible. So we're going to follow that thread to Moses' return to Mount Sinai, especially the way it included the intricate design and instructions for the tabernacle. That was like a mobile representation of God's presence, God's holiness, and how people connect with Him. The design was to have God's presence among them at the center of their world, especially in what was called the tabernacle's Holy of Holies. That was like the hot spot of God's holy presence. Again, holy, unlike any other, unlike any other presence. There is precious little today that compares to the reverence the Israelites had for the tabernacle, and then the permanent version of it, the temple. I can't think of anything that would have the kind of awe they had for the Holy of Holies. Have you ever been at the ocean and watched a huge electrical storm move in? Or have you ever been far away from the city late at night when the sky just gets crystal clear and you're flooded with amazement and awe? Is that because the universe is arrogant? I mean, do you have awe? Do you have that amazement because the universe is somehow arrogant? Well, of course not. You respond in awe because the universe is awesome in the fullest sense of the word. You are in awe because it is awesome. Is God the Creator arrogant? He is holy. He is unlike any other God. In the book Yawning at Tigers, Drew Dick wrote, "For the most part, we neither tremble in fear nor thrill with excitement at the prospect of encountering this wild deity. We give mere mental assent to truths that should leave us shaking." Leviticus is full of things that try to help us with that. Things to symbolize or illustrate God's majestic uniqueness, along with things that show God's people are to be unlike any other people. Leviticus is also full of things God's holy ones are to avoid. Although we need to realize many of them will only confuse us if we try to squeeze them into our culture and our time. To try to comprehend them, we need help and insights from people who deeply study and understand ancient Hebrew culture and language. Because God is holy, unlike any other God, He doesn't leave it up to us to make ourselves holy, make ourselves unlike other people, although that gets confused in many English versions of the Bible. A classic example is Leviticus 11, verses 44 and 45. I'll have that on the screen in a moment. That's where many Bibles seem to have God saying, "I am holy, so you be holy too." The thing is, in the original language, the part that's on us was not a command, as in, "You be holy." This isn't about like gritting our teeth or like white knuckling it, trying to make ourselves or keep ourselves holy. It was more literally like God saying, "Because I am holy, unlike any other God, you can be holy, unlike other people." God added a statement about some things we are to keep avoiding. But all through the Bible, we are told we won't be able to on our own. We won't even want to avoid them left on our own. if something doesn't change, we're more doomed than any climate change prophet knows. Because the ultimate change that is needed is not out there, it's inside us, inside human souls. From Leviticus being given in the Sinai wilderness, follow the thread forward about 6 centuries and into Jerusalem, to where it runs into the story of the prophet Isaiah. As Moses was, Isaiah was a capital P prophet. He was holy. He was set apart for a special part in God's design, the part of a capital P prophet. And that included being used to teach us crucial lessons about being holy, being set apart for a special part in the story. And how amazing it is that God has set pathetic creatures like us apart for special parts in his story. Isaiah had an experience like Moses did, but it was much more intense. Isaiah was given a spectacular vision, quite unlike Moses's, where he saw God wearing a spectacular, huge robe and sitting on this majestic throne in the heart of the temple. Now, Isaiah knew someone like him who should never be allowed in there. He had apparently heard enough about the temple and that extremely holy part to see some of its most significant symbols in his vision, but they were being animated in wild ways. That was particularly true of some angelic figures, the seraphim. The word meant flaming ones. Don't think like pudgy gold babies with wings on fluffy clouds. That came from a mixture of Greek mythology and artwork over the years. We need to think more like creatures from nightmares in Disney movies. Angels of flaming fire, each with 6 wings, and with 2 wings they covered their faces in reverence. With 2 wings they covered their feet, and with 2 wings they flew. Just try to imagine being Isaiah, trying to describe it with words, especially as it continued. These seraphim, they were calling out to each other, he said, and they said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of heaven's armies. The whole earth is filled with his glory." And he said their voices shook the temple to its foundations, and the entire building was filled with smoke. Holy, holy, holy. Back then, if you wanted to emphasize something, you repeated it. And you would only say something more than twice if you were trying to dramatically emphasize something. It would be heard as an expression of extreme amazement and awe. No wonder Isaiah was totally blown away. But he was able to get a few powerful words out. Look at this version of it. Isaiah said, "I am in so much trouble. I'm ruined. I'm just a human being, fallible and stammering. My lips are encrusted with filth, and I live among people just like me." A crucial part of being holy, being unique, being unlike other people, is to feel our own personal versions of what Isaiah experienced and wrote. Our own personal versions where we're able to admit how unholy we can be and how unholy we are without God. Now look at what happened in response to Isaiah's confession. He said, "One of the seraphim flew to me with a burning coal he had taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The coal was so hot, even a flaming angel couldn't touch it. And Isaiah said, he touched my lips with it. And he said, see, this coal has touched your lips. Now your guilt is removed and your sins are forgiven. A huge part of being a prophet during the time of the Old Testament involved pointing ahead to something. In this case, I should say pointing ahead to someone. Isaiah was given a glimpse of who was coming and why he was coming. Until then, like any Israelite, Isaiah would have passionately believed the only way to deal with sin and guilt was through sacrifice. This seraphim introduced a drastically and radically different way to take care of sin. We'll follow that thread to near the end of Isaiah's life. After years of learning about God's design and his ultimate plan for dealing with sin, for dealing with our unholiness. Isaiah learned that the flaming angel's burning coal was going to be replaced by someone unlike anyone else, someone who was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised and we did not care. Yet it was our weaknesses he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. He was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. All of us, like sheep, have strayed away. We have left God's paths to follow our own. Yet the Lord laid on him the sins of us all. Those words touched Isaiah more deeply and more powerfully than the hot coal in the angel's tongs had. Oh, he had heard holy, 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 trying in vain to describe a God unlike any other. That God continues to call and to prepare people to be unlike any other people, set apart for unique parts in his design. Well, Isaiah's main part was to record these words. He couldn't have known the one he wrote about would not appear in the story for 700 more years. But that did not stop Isaiah from saying it and writing it, no matter how unpopular it made him. You remember what I mentioned about how being set apart for special parts in God's design includes movement, how it assumes ongoing going. Isaiah realized that just after the coal had left his lips. He wrote, "Then I heard the Lord asking, 'Whom shall I send as a messenger to my people? Who will go?' And I said, 'Lord, I'll go.'" I mentioned how important it is to follow threads that run all through the Bible. Paul knew as much about them as anyone, especially after all the years he spent ravenously studying and teaching what we have in the Old Testament, and then all the years he had getting to know the one the Old Testament was pointing to, and telling all about him wherever he would go. Paul never stopped being amazed by the way the central thread in the story ran through him and through other broken, fallen people who are set apart for special parts in God's design. That's why Paul wrote to all the holy ones. All the holy ones. Those who are set apart for special parts in the design. We have one more quick stop to make along the thread to illustrate something that is part of the design for all the holy ones. It's in Ezekiel, another one of the prophets Paul would have known like the back of his hand. Paul must have been amazed to see how he was included in Ezekiel's vision from God. In it, Ezekiel was led to the temple. Again, the site of God's holy presence at the time. When he was there, Ezekiel saw water trickle out of the temple. Then he saw the trickle turn into a stream, and then into a river, and it kept growing as it flowed to and through the desert, and he followed it as it went. And he saw trees and all other kinds of life beginning to sprout out as it flowed along. And when the river hit the Dead Sea, keyword, when the river hit the Dead Sea, it began to make that dead body of water fresh and pure, and new life began to spring up in it and all around it. And more than that, Ezekiel wrote, wherever the river flows, it will bring life. Wherever the river flows, it will bring life. Jesus called himself living water. The Holy Spirit lets that living water flow into and through the holy ones. The ones set apart by God for special parts in the design, in our ongoing going.